Dr. Chaudhary, and thanks so much for your very, very kind words. Hello, everybody, and absolutely pleasure to be here today with all of you. Thanks for having me. Let me try and share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can. Maybe we can put it, yeah, absolutely. Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So my topic today is pharma marketing moving beyond drugs. And what you see here is this small capsule. This person is holding this capsule, but in reality, I hope I can give you a little bit of the insider story. What goes behind in terms of getting this small little capsule from the laboratory all the way to the patient. So and I can assure you it's a very interesting journey, and I hope you will also find it quite interesting, exciting, and probably we'll have a lot of questions, which we will have a little bit more of an interactive session towards the end. So with that, let me move on. So these are the 4 areas that I'm planning to cover today. I will give you a little bit of an overview of the global pharmaceutical market. And then, of course, the Indian pharma market, how does it look like? And while I'm doing these 2 areas, the global as well as the Indian pharmaceutical market, I will also give you an overview of the trends that are shaping the pharmaceutical industry at this point in time. Then we will talk a little bit about the stakeholders, who are the people involved at the various stages of this journey of this capsule or the drug or the pill, from the research laboratories to the patient. And then we will have a case study, a very interesting case study, and I would really invite all of you to participate in that case study. So let's start with the global pharmaceutical market. Now, I have a question for all of you, and take a guess. I don't know if some of you are from the pharmaceutical market. If you are or if you are not, doesn't matter. Just take a guess of what do you think is the size of the global pharmaceutical market? How big do you think it is? Any guesses? $10 billion. Okay. Thank you, Shashank, for taking that as 600 billion. Wow, that's also quite a nice number. Okay, let me reveal the answer. It's actually even bigger than that. So in 2023, the forecast is that the global pharmaceutical market is valued at around 1,572 billion US dollars. And this is based on the research which was done by IQVIA, which is a very well-respected market insights and market research organization. And just to give you some perspective of how big this number is, this 1,572 billion is almost on a rough basis about half the GDP of India, projected in 2023. So that will give you an idea of how big the international and the global pharmaceutical market is. So with that, let's understand what do we mean by the global pharmaceutical market, and how is it divided? Now, typically the pharmaceutical market is divided based on the reimbursement approach. Now, what do I mean by reimbursement? So reimbursement means where the government is paying for the medicines as well as the treatment. So that is considered as a reimbursement market. For example, if you see here, I have classified the global pharma market into three distinct parts. You have the reimbursed markets, you have the out-of-pocket or self-pay markets, and then you have the partially reimbursed markets. Now, if you see these reimbursed markets, the arrow goes towards Europe and Germany and all of these countries over here. So Europe, most of the European countries, Scandinavian countries, they are all fully reimbursed markets, which means that in case if somebody is staying in Europe, a European citizen, if he or she requires treatment, surgery, or any medication related to that or otherwise, then the government pays for those medications. And therefore, they are considered as reimbursed markets. And then you have another type of market, which is what we have like in India, in Philippines, in Singapore, and many other markets as well, which is known as the out-of-pocket or self-pay markets, which means that here the government does not pay for the medication or the treatment, but individuals have to pay for the medication or the treatment. However, there are minor exceptions. Like, for example, in India, if you are working for the armed forces or if you are working for the railways and things like that, I think there is a government or an institutional coverage for the treatment. So there is a little bit of exception to that rule. But broadly, to majority of the population, it's still, the individual has to pay for the treatment and the medication expenses. And then we have some countries, like there are many countries in Southeast Asia, like in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam and Thailand, and there are other countries also in South America where these markets are partially reimbursed markets, which means that the government is not, as the name suggests, the government is not completely covering the costs and the expenses for the treatment, but is giving you a partial, or giving these citizens a partial reimbursement. So that is how broadly, the global pharma market is divided based on the reimbursement approach that exists. Now let's look at how the global pharma market is divided in terms of the value. Now, as I mentioned, if you look at 2023, the forecast is of 1,572 billion US dollars. But if we look at the projection of the global pharmaceutical market, then it is forecast to grow at a CAGR of around 5.7% between 2021 and 2026, reaching to about 1,837 billion by 2026. So it's a massive number. And here on the chart on the left hand side of your screen, you will see how the progression is happening. I think I'm sure some of you probably have this question, that why is it that suddenly in 2021 we see this spike, from 3.6% growth to suddenly becoming 8.9%, and then this growth sort of stabilizes and reaches a level of around 5.1% by 2026. And this spike, as probably you would understand, is mainly because of the COVID situation, and because of the increased healthcare spends that governments and individuals had to take care because of the COVID related vaccination and other treatments. So that's why in 2021 we had a spike in the size of the world pharmaceutical market, but over a period of time it will stabilize to a level of around 5%. Now, if we look at the on the right side, if you look at the chart on the right side where we have the bubble chart, this will give you an idea of how big or how the pharmaceutical market is distributed by geographic regions. I mean, as you can clearly see, North America is the world's biggest pharmaceutical market, and there is absolutely no one close to the size of the pharma market that exists in the US. And then following US, we have the EU countries or the European region, and then we have Southeast Asia, and then after Southeast Asia we have Latin America and the Caribbean region, and then we have the Euro, and then we have the non-EU countries, and then we have the Indian subcontinent, and so on, and Japan after that. So that's how the pharma market is divided geographically. And if you see the growths of these pharma markets, Europe, I mean, while US, Europe, and Southeast Asia are big markets, but as you would understand, these are also quite matured markets. So the growth in these markets are also in that range of around 5%. Whereas the new and upcoming and the emerging markets like India, Latin America, here the growth rates are are significantly higher. Like in India, I think it's close. It's around 10%, and Latin America is even higher. So that's how the global pharma market is evolving. So moving on, if we want to understand, how is it that the world pharma market is evolving, that North America, I think, as we discussed, has the highest contribution to growth globally, growing at about 4.5% between 2021 and 2026. So as you see here, that from 2021, where the global pharma market was at about 1,392 billion US dollars, and is expected to move up to about 1,800 plus billion dollars. The growth will predominantly come from the US, followed by Latin America, and then followed by the European countries, Southeast Asia, Europe, non-EU countries, and then we also have India contributing, and the Indian subcontinent. So it's not just India, but the Indian subcontinent also significantly contributing to that growth. And below you have a table which kind of compares, how the growths have evolved and in this phase. And one area there where I would like to draw your attention is, if you look at the CAGR of between 2021 and 2026, and the historical CAGR of 2026 and 2021, you would see that overall, I mean, if you look at this total column at the end on the right end of the screen, you would see that the historical CAGR between 2016 and 2021 was 5.9%. However, when we look at the CAGR between 2021 and 2026, which is the future, the CAGR comes down to about 5.7%. And this is, although it's only a 0.2 percentage points, but it is quite significant, and there are several reasons behind that. So what it essentially highlights is that yes, the pharma market is going to grow at about 5.7% in the future, but the growths are coming down. And if you see by region, there are many regions where the growths are also significantly coming down compared to others. Like, for example, if you look at North America used to grow by about 5.2% between up to 2021, which will come down to about 4.5%. Whereas in some other regions like Latin America, the growths would increase. So they were growing at about 16.4, they would slightly increase to about 7.2. And then if you want to look at the Indian subcontinent, until 2021 used to grow at about 12%, but moving forward, the growth estimates are around 9.4%. And I will touch on, what are the reasons, what are the factors in the subsequent slide that on one hand, are supporting the growth, but then there are also several factors which are constraining this growth. And that will also give you a little bit of an idea of the trends that are shaping the global pharma market. So moving on, here I have a little bit of, we've tried to break that down and give you a picture of the situation in the major developed pharmaceutical markets like the US and the EU countries and Canada and so on. And there also, if you see, the growths are actually even lower compared to the global average. And here you see that by 2026, the expected growth would be around 3.6%. So moving forward, as I was saying, so what are the key drivers or constraints for this growth? Why are we seeing that the growth, on one hand, yes, 5% growth or 5.7% growth is not a bad number, and there are definitely factors that are contributing to this growth. So we will discuss that in this slide, and then we will also discuss, what are the factors that are limiting the growth to go beyond, to even maybe higher single digit or double digit growths. So the key drivers for the growth are new product launches. I think that is clearly a topic which is important for growth or growth in any category, whether it's pharmaceutical, FMCG, or any other industry, and pharma being no different. So there are a lot of new product launches that would happen in specialty in specialized areas like in oncology, immunology, in gene therapies, and so on and so forth, where they would significantly contribute to the growth of the industry. So I'm talking about new research molecules, and they will really propel the growth of this industry. Then the second factor that will help to recover in the recovery of the pharma market is overall recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And why am I mentioning this specifically here is because when we had COVID, the in several cases and across almost all countries around the world, what we observed was that the patients mostly avoided coming to the hospital, and even doctors, even regular practitioners, were not attending their offices in a regular manner, and that also impacted several treatments and procedures. So for example, if I needed a surgery, often the patient would, if possible, would try to delay that surgery and would wait for COVID to be over. And in the same way, pharma companies as well, did not have a very good time launching new products, because if you are launching a new product, but then the patient footfall in the hospitals are very limited, then obviously you don't have the possibility for doctors to prescribe these products to those patients, and therefore most of these new launches were not very successful. So that was also a major challenge that the industry faced during the COVID period. However, now I think overall, I think it's quite positive that I think we can say that COVID is behind us, and we see again patients coming back to the hospitals, and everything sort of getting back to normal, and that will also help in recovery of the industry. And then one very important point is around awareness. I think if we look at 10 years before versus today, I think the level of awareness that people have through multiple channels have tremendously increased. People are now in many ways taking control of their physical health, mental health, and that has also helped in supporting the pharma industry. For example, the awareness about medication, awareness about diabetes, awareness about hypertension, stroke, and all of these things have made people a lot more aware. And therefore, in the past, when people used to shy away from treatments or take it like, maybe, okay, I may have something else which I may not need to treat. Nowadays, I think probably that situation has significantly changed, where if there are any alarm signals, then people or patients don't hesitate to visit the emergency clinic to get themselves checked. And that has also helped in better diagnosis, better treatment, and also in terms of supporting the pharma industry. Then the other thing that has helped in driving the industry is the improved access to innovative drugs. I think there are lots of, I think around the world, I mean, if you are looking at US or Europe or Australia or Japan, I think different countries, they have allocated specific funds which are geared towards supporting improved access to innovative drugs. And why are they doing it is because the innovative drugs actually help to reduce the complications for these patients. For example, I'll give you an example. Like I know, there are drugs. I don't want to take a brand name here, but there are drugs which have multiple indications. Like for example, I'll take diabetes. Now, maybe even 2 3 years before, when a patient with diabetes presented himself or herself to the doctor's clinic, the main concern of the doctor would be to control the blood sugar levels and the HbA1c levels, as we call them now. But that is not anymore these days. Why? Because now there are medications which not only help to reduce the HbA1c levels or the blood sugar levels, but they also have a very positive effect in improving the cardiac functions, reducing cardiovascular deaths, and also in protecting the kidney. And why are they important? Because as maybe some of you might be aware that if somebody has diabetes, then it is a progressive disorder. What it means is that while it starts with an increased level of blood sugar, but then eventually it has a very negative effect on different organs of our body, and especially our cardiac functioning and also our kidney functioning. And therefore, if you have a drug, an innovative drug, which not only helps to reduce the blood glucose level, but also helps to control the cardiovascular performance and the function, and helps to protect your kidneys. It's a very positive thing for the government, and because that would then help the governments to reduce their budget in managing these kind of patients. Suppose if this drug was not there, because if this drug was not there, then these patients would have had cardiac. Some of them would have had cardiac complications, and some of them could have had kidney complications, and then the governments would have had to spend additional money, pay the doctors, pay for the hospital facilities and the beds and things like that, which now they don't have to pay. So that is why the governments are also very supportive towards innovative medications where the health outcomes significantly improve. So that has also been a major driver. Plus, I think the disease prevention initiatives, like when we are talking about non-communicable diseases, I think there's a lot of efforts that the government as well as various non-government organizations are putting in to educate the masses and to spread awareness, so that there are a lot of efforts put in place to prevent diseases. And at epidemiologic and demographic drivers are also there, which support these drivers. So with that, let's also look at the key constraints. I think the major constraint that I will discuss is essentially centered around the cost. Because yes, while on one hand you have innovative medications, which on the long term is beneficial for the governments, but then what the governments also try to do is to make sure that they also get the funding to fund these innovative medications by cost containment measures in existing treatment options. So what I mean by that is, suppose if a drug has been there in the market for a certain period of time, the government will come up with various innovative ways of cost containment, in terms of having whether it's discounts, rebates, and discussions that the reimbursement authorities or the payers will have with the companies. Like I'll give you an example of South Korea. Uh, what happens in South Korea is that when so the government approves an innovative medication for treatment of all patients in South Korea. So it's a fully reimbursed market where the South Korean people, they don't have to pay for their medication, and the government pays for it. And say, as an example, the government approves a new treatment for hypertension, and then the government has an agreement with the company where the government says that, what, when you achieve a certain volume of business in South Korea, then the government will cut the prices of that medication. So suppose the government agrees with the company that when you achieve, say, 40% market share, that's when the government will cut the prices by 30%. And then the company negotiates, discusses with the government, and eventually has to come to an agreement. So I'm just giving you one example, and there are several examples, and different countries have different approaches for cost containment measures that they follow. Plus, of course, there are pricing reviews. I think I mean, in many countries, there are at regular time, there are pricing reviews. Like India, we have the price control, drug price control authorities, and so on and so forth. So they do pricing reviews from time to time, and they try to optimize the prices. Rational drug use and prescribing controls. This is again something that is seen mostly in the European countries, where they are where the government is paying for the medication. So here what they do is they incentivize hospitals and doctors to make sure that the right patients are given the right medications. So what I'm trying to say is that, like, giving an example, like in India, uh, because the government is also not paying, and it's a self-pay market, and then somebody falls ill, and then it's all easy. You can go to the pharmacy and you can buy maybe a third generation or a fourth generation antibiotic, which may not be required. And that is exactly what the governments do in these kind of countries, and they try to promote rational drug use, and therefore penalize doctors if they see them prescribing drugs which are not really necessary for those patients. So that's another way by which they try to control the utilization of pharmaceutical medications in these countries. And plus, of course, across the world, I think all countries are trying to implement measures to improve biosimilars and generics uptake. And that is, I think it's on our side. I think for India, it's a massive opportunity, because India is one of the, it's I think, I don't know if I would be correct in saying, but probably, maybe after China, or very close to China, I think one of the major generic suppliers meeting this requirement. So it's a huge opportunity for the Indian pharma companies. So those are actually essentially the key constraints when we are looking at the global pharma market. So moving on, I think if we look at, okay, this I think we have already more or less covered. We have looked at the developed markets. Now, even amongst the developed markets, of course, it's the US, which is driving the growth, followed by some of these other European countries, that is Germany, UK, and so on. But broadly, the picture is similar. Now, I want to also give you a little bit of an idea of who are the big pharma companies worldwide. And here I've tried to give you a very simple way of essentially cutting and slicing these companies. I mean, of course, you can do it in various different ways, but these are the top pharma companies based on the total revenue. And worldwide, number one is Pfizer, followed by AbbVie, and then we have Johnson and Johnson, Novartis, Roche, Bristol Myers Squibb or BMS, and then we have Merck, and this Merck is MSD. There is another Merck as well, which is the German Merck, which is a different company. And then we have AstraZeneca, Sanofi, and GSK. So these are the companies which make up the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies. Now, let's spend a little bit of time looking at the Indian pharma market. How does it look like? So before I go in specifically into India, I think we are essentially talking about the Indian subcontinent here, which not only includes India, but it also includes the neighboring countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, and Afghanistan. And here what we see that these 8 markets jointly contribute roughly 4.2% of the global pharma market growth during the period of 21 to 26, and the market forecast is around a CAGR of 9.4%, reaching at about 52 billion by 2026. So here again, I think in 2021 there was a massive spike, which was predominantly because of the COVID pandemic. But over a period of time, the growth would stabilize, and as we see here, the growth is significantly higher than what we see at a worldwide or a global level. which is at around 5.7%. But in this region, the growth would be roughly around 9% plus. Yeah. And clearly, India is the biggest market here, followed by Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and the smaller countries like Afghanistan, Maldives, and Bhutan. So what are the key drivers? And as I talked about the global market, let's also spend some time to understand, what are the key drivers and the constraints when we are looking at, the Indian pharma market. When we are looking at the Indian pharma market here, it's about improvements in healthcare coverage. I mean, I think some of you are already aware about it. Like, for example, in India, there is the Ayushman Bharat, or the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. I think these are efforts that various countries, including the country where I am currently in, which is Indonesia, where they are trying to bring more people under an insurance kind of a coverage, so that the healthcare burden of the country is reduced. And that is something which will also help not only in improving the overall health of the population, but also contribute towards the growth of the pharmaceutical market in these countries. Then, of course, there are some upward pressure on drug prices. Although this is not a very long-term thing, but then I think because of the COVID situation, and now given that there is that the discussion around inflation and everything around that. But what we have seen is that there have been pressures on the currency depreciation, and what that means is that the drug prices and the production prices will go up, and it will become more expensive for people living in this part of the world, and that unfortunately will also, I mean, in a way, contribute to a bigger turnover for the pharma industry. But I think it's more a time-bound phenomena, and over a period of time, it will normalize. Because these things happen in cycles, as we all understand. I think what is more important in terms of driver is the regulatory improvements. I mean, even if I can talk about India, I mean, I remember when I used to work in India, I think the regulatory approval used to take a long time and a very complex process. I think the government and the regulatory bodies have done a very good job in streamlining the regulatory process, in making it much more faster, and ensuring that new innovative medications are obtained regulatory approvals way faster, and that has really contributed also to the growth of the pharma industry in this part of the world. And then last but not the least, I think as applicable for the global market, I think awareness has improved tremendously, and that has also helped in the growth of the pharma industry. I think the constraints, if we look at it, price control is definitely a big challenge for us. I think, as I mentioned already, for example, in India, we have the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, then we have the Drug Price Control Order, then we have the National List of Essential Medicines, and so on and so forth. And these agencies, they keep on adding new drugs into that list. What it does is then it reduces the value of these drugs significantly, and that obviously then impacts the size of the market in many ways. So price controls, of course, has been a constraint for the industry. However, on the hindsight, I think it's very positive for the patients, because now the patients can get these medications at a much lower price. So I think it's good for the patients. Tougher operating environment for domestic small scale players, because what has happened is, I mean, again, related to the regulatory situation, pharma industry is probably amongst the most, if not the highest, regulated industry, because at the end of the day, here we are impacting the lives of patients. So whether it's manufacturing or it's any other stage of the pharmaceutical industry and its processes, there are very tough and strict operating processes. And what that means is that for domestic players to manufacture, for example, or set up a manufacturing facility for a pharmaceutical product is not easy, because there are lots of quality requirements and regulations that they have to comply, and that makes it also quite expensive to set up. And therefore there is a that's a barrier, for also smaller players to enter this market. Then supply disruption due to natural calamities like floods. I think the Indian subcontinent region, unfortunately, there are often these kind of natural calamities where again, distribution networks are broken, drug access becomes limited, and that also impacts the performance of the pharma industry. And last but not the least, I think, is access to healthcare in vulnerable communities, because in the Indian subcontinent and in India, as we know, still, majority of the population is living in outside our major cities, and there, as we all understand and know, when you're looking at the ratio of doctor to patient, it is really really low. And therefore many times, treatment, diagnosis does not happen, and therefore treatments don't happen, and therefore people living in our villages, unfortunately, are belonging to these vulnerable communities where many times they are unable to access treatment options. And that has also been a major reason why the development and the growth of the pharma industry, has been a little bit limited. But I think there are steps that are being taken. I think there are a lot of NGOs, NFOs, and even government, and even there are several social entrepreneurs who are working in these areas to improve access to healthcare in vulnerable communities. And moving forward, I'm also very very hopeful that it would improve and provide more access to people living in remote areas. So that little bit covers, the barriers, the drivers and the barriers in the Indian subcontinent. Now, as I mentioned, obviously in this region, India continues to be the major growth driver and will contribute maximum in terms of growth for this region until 2026. And here again, if you compare the overall total historical CAGR versus the CAGR now, you would see that the CAGR now is lower than the historical levels. And one of the reason also, which is not probably explained enough in this group, is that in many cases, many therapeutic areas, many therapies have now become genericized, and because there are many generics available, so that has also while has improved the access to healthcare, but overall the size of the industry has come down. So with that, let me give you a quick snapshot of the top Indian pharma companies. I think clearly Sun is the leader amongst the Indian pharma companies. And then we have Abbott, then we have Cipla, Mankind, Alkem, Lupin, Intas, Macleods, Torrent, and Cadila. These numbers, this is I got it based on October 2021. I could not get a more recent one, but what I understand from some reports is more or less, the rankings are still similar to what we have, whereas the global one was a lot more recent. So just as a disclaimer. Okay, now let's look at the stakeholders. Now this is I think will be also quite interesting for you. Can you try and answer this? Who are the stakeholders involved in making this medicine reach the patient? Who do you think are the people involved? Maybe a quick 1 minute if you can use the chat function.
I think there is some issue with chat box, Argo.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I
Okay.
think there is some glitch. I think some glitch that is just going. It was doing well, but I think somewhere in the middle of the session, somewhere something is happening.
Okay, no problem. Then maybe I'll just continue.
Sure.
So, actually, normally, I mean, for my friends who have joined here today, may not be from the pharma background, and even for my friends, when I ask them, many times I get the answer why it's probably the pharma company and the doctor and the patient. So it's just these three parties involved in making sure that this small tablet reaches the patient. But actually it's a lot more complicated. And let me try to explain this picture with you and take you through. So typically, when when a new disease area is thought about, for example, let me say, let me take an example, like say stroke. Now, stroke, globally is a big problem. And maybe suppose there is a company A, and the senior management of the company decides that, what, as an organization, we want to invest, and we want to put our budgets to discover a new medicine that would really bring benefit for patients who are impacted by stroke. So that decision is actually taken by the senior management of the company. And then what happens is then that flows into the R&D department, and then the scientists put a lot of effort and several years of research to come up with a molecule that could help to treat stroke. And in many cases, in probably 9 out of 10 cases, they would fail. Probably only in 1 or even less than 1% of these cases that the R&D setup would actually succeed in really discovering an innovative medication. So once they discover something that they feel makes sense and probably could help to maybe prevent or treat stroke, then they hand that over to the clinical development department. Now, what the clinical development department do is that they do then the different trials, because you cannot give a medicine to a patient directly. So you will have to test it out, and there are different phases of testing. Some of you might have heard there is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and so on. So there are testings done on animals, and then there are testings done in controlled environments, and then there are testings which are done in real world setting. So all of these, when the clinical development and the research suggests that the product is, or the molecule that was discovered is efficacious and safe, only then the product is moved to the next departments, which is to the medical department, where the medical department determines, what is the medical benefit of these products, what are the positives, and also what could be the adverse events and things like that, and how do we engage with the medical, with the external medical fraternity. And based on all those observations, then it goes into the regulatory department, where the regulatory department works with the different regulatory bodies in the government to finally arrive at a particular indication. Or by indication, what it means is, the particular use of the medication. For example, maybe the company thought that this molecule is great for treatment of stroke and also prevention of stroke. But then when they have done the clinical trial, they realize that actually the molecule is only very effective in treatment of stroke, but not so effective in prevention of stroke. And then the regulatory bodies, then they submit that kind of a label to the government agencies, that, what, we have come up with this molecule X, which can be used for treatment of stroke and also can be partially used for prevention of stroke. But then the regulatory bodies say, no, 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 we don't agree. The government regulatory body says, no, 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 we don't agree. We will only give you an approval for treatment of stroke. We will not give you an approval for prevention of stroke. Because if you want an approval for prevention of stroke, then you have to do more research and then come back with more data. And only once we are convinced, then we will give you an approval for treatment of stroke. So that's what happens. So then the regulatory body gets an approval for treatment of stroke, and then they inform the clinical development department that, guys, if we want prevention of stroke, then we need more research. And then the clinical development department goes back to the R&D and the senior management to get an approval and decision of whether they want to go in that direction or not. So that's about the regulatory department. Then comes the pharmacovigilance department. The pharmacovigilance department is essentially a department which monitors the drug safety. Once the drug starts to be used, like when you are doing a clinical research, maybe the drug is only given to a few thousand patients, but then when the drug eventually is marketed, then it is prescribed to millions of patients, and there could be different side effects, different observations which were never visible during the clinical trial phases. And that is what the pharmacovigilance very closely monitors. Then, of course, we have a strategy department in every organization. So these are all the internal stakeholders. And then this strategy department decides that, okay, for marketing this drug, are we capable enough? Like, for example, I'll give you a very, very recent example. Like, if you remember, BioNTech, is a European company, and they were not confident that they could market the COVID vaccines alone around the world. So they looked out for partnerships, and then they got global partnerships. So Pfizer came forward, and Pfizer BioNTech, they partnered together for promoting those medications. So that's one example of the strategy. But there are many different things. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Trust me, it's a lot more complicated. So once the strategy is defined, then of course you need to produce them in bulk. You need to produce them in quantities that meets the requirement of the world. And then, of course, there is a supply chain department. Supply chain department ensures that the drug reaches the patient through the various different logistic channels. And then, of course, there is the marketing department. The marketing department, as you see in the icon, there are all these small, dots that connect to marketing. So marketing essentially is a little bit like the central pivot, and kind of leading this entire process, and cross-functionally coordinating with all these different departments. Because at the end of the day, job of marketing, like in all, as the definition of marketing suggests, is essentially to create value for the end customer. And then we have market access. So market access, I think, as I mentioned, at the beginning of my presentation, if you remember, that there are three different types of markets. There are reimbursed markets, then there are non-reimbursed markets, and then there are partially reimbursed markets. So market access in pharma is becoming very, very important, especially in the reimbursed markets and the partially reimbursed markets, because they then work with the government payers and the government insurers to make sure that these drugs are part of the reimbursement scheme and patients can easily access these drugs. Then, of course, we have the sales department, and their job is to communicate the drugs information to the doctors and the hospitals and the pharmacies. So that's what the sales team does. And then there is a commercial operations team, which makes sure that the effort of all these teams are properly directed. Then we have insights and forecasting team, which makes sure that we get the right insights from the customers, and then also in terms of forecasting that we are producing enough medication to meet the needs of the patients. And then, of course, like all other industries, there are training departments. In pharma, there is another department which is becoming more and more important, which is patient advocacy. Because many times in many developed countries now, patients are also gradually taking control of the treatment, and they seek information. And there are various patient advocacy groups, which could be related to cancer, related to diabetes, related to various other treatments and indications. And these patient advocacy groups are also then working with companies to get proper information so that the patients are compliant to the treatment, adhere to the treatment, and get the desired outcomes. Then, of course, there are support functions like in all other industries. There is IT department supporting the entire operations, finance, HR, legal, and compliance. In fact, in pharma, legal and compliance is super critical because pharma is, as I mentioned, is a highly regulated industry, and there are very strict do's and don'ts in pharma marketing, particularly. And their being compliant is very, very important. And last but not least, of course, we also have the communications department for internal and external communication with internal employees as well as externally with the media. So these are all the internal stakeholders. Now let's look at who are the external stakeholders. So on the external side, of course, there are the patients, and then there are doctors, then there are nurses, hospitals. Then, of course, now with the development, I mean, as we saw during the COVID pandemic, I think digital health and telemedicine, I think, has significantly increased and will be here to stay. So telemedicine is becoming a very important area. Then, of course, there are private clinics, private hospitals. Then there are medical associations, patient associations, regulatory bodies, reimbursement agencies, insurance companies in many cases, distributors, wholesalers, retail pharmacies, industry associations, and media. So there are so many different stakeholders, as you see here, who are involved in many different ways to make sure that the medication reaches, from the lab to the patient. So now I will quickly move into the case study. We have a very interesting case study, but I've tried to make it as simple as possible. So just a little bit, but I know that the chat function is not working. So I don't know how, or maybe you'll probably not be able to participate. So I'll probably take you through. So here the case is about stroke prevention in atrial fibrillation. So this is a real marketing case. So this is for patients who have a risk of having a stroke. And you don't have to be super technical to understand this. You don't also need any medical knowledge to understand this case study, so don't worry. So this is about preventing stroke. So that's what we are talking about. And the drug category that we will be talking about is NOACs. So there's a novel oral anticoagulant. So these are drugs which essentially prevents clot formation inside the blood, because as you know, like when we have a cut, the blood comes out initially, but then eventually clots. So similarly, there are possibilities that the blood could also clot inside our body. And these novel oral anticoagulants could prevent that. So it's about the NOACs. So the case goes like this, that we have three products. There is product P, product X, and product E. And then we have product P, which is a high efficacy, moderate safety, and can be given twice daily. I mean, or should be taken twice daily. Then there is product X, which has moderate efficacy, moderate safety, once daily, and has been evaluated in high risk patients. And then we have product E, which has moderate efficacy, high safety, but needs to be taken twice daily. So my question to you would be, how would you position these products? Suppose if you were the marketing heads, global marketing heads for these products, how would you position these products so that the patients are prescribed either product P, product X, or product E? Dr. Chaudhary, I don't know if there is any way if the participants could unmute or and say their answer, or
they can actually send to the panelists, that is you or the panelists. They can send it. I think that is working now, fortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, so I request all of you to, in case if those of you want to participate, please you can send your answers in the chat box only to the panelists.
Any thoughts? Like, you have one product which is highly efficacious, Product E. But product E, Ravish, thanks for your reply. But why product E? Why do you think product E? What is the reason for it? So my question, Orko, is that suppose if you are the global marketing head for maybe one of these products, yeah, product P or product X or product E, you can select which product you want to become the global marketing head, and tell me, why is it, I mean, how would you position this product, and these are the benefits of the product that I've listed here, that, product P is high efficacy, moderate safety, twice daily. Product X has moderate efficacy, moderate safety, but once daily. And product E has moderate efficacy, but high safety, but still requires twice daily. So suppose you need to choose, yeah, which product that you like, and then you can tell me why you like that product and how would you position that. Suppose if you were to ask somebody to prescribe this product, then what would you tell that person? Firstly, which product would you choose and what would you tell them? I get the answer, it's E, but if it would be nice if you can tell me why. I see some of you have said because of high safety. Product P, maybe I think maybe because of high efficacy. Revati. Risk benefit ratio. Okay, E, that's a very nice technical answer. Okay, Orko for safety. Thanks, Orko. E, because safety is most important. Okay, good. So thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, I will move forward, and I really like your participation, and I like that you took a position. But here, what I would request you is, before I reveal what really happened, and this is a real case, and I was involved in that. So I will reveal in the next slide. But what I was expecting is that I think even before you make a choice, I think the first thing that you need to question is, what is it that the customers value the most? And that is something super important, my friends, because yes, I may like efficacy or I may like safety, and maybe that is the right answer, nothing wrong about it. But then what is very important is that when we are trying to position a product, of course there are many different steps that we need to follow for positioning of a product. But as I mentioned, of all the departments that are involved in the internal stakeholders, if you remember, one department was customer insights and forecasting. And that is a very important department when you are just about to launch a product, because the insights you need from the customers, because at the end of the day, you need to launch a product that is valuable for your customers and what the customers would value most, and therefore it's super important. But just to reveal the answer, yes, those of you who said product E, actually product E was the winner in the market, and that was mainly because of safety. And I'll tell you why safety is, because when you are looking at stroke prevention, because here the very critical word is prevention. So a doctor is prescribing a product to prevent a bad thing from happening. So what is very important for the doctor is that my patient should have a good experience while taking the product. They should not have a bleeding, because in these products, as you understand, these are anticoagulants, so they actually could cause bleeding. So in case if I have a product which is a very highly efficacious product, there is a higher risk of bleeding, and in those cases, the patient will become extremely uh, unsatisfied, yeah, and we'll have a lot of challenges, if they have a lot of bleeding. Whereas from an efficacy perspective, maybe the drug is more efficacious, but then efficacy is something that in these sort of preventive treatments comes later, and doctors usually, I'm not trying to generalize, but usually they try to prioritize the safety parameters before looking at efficacy, and that's why eventually product E won. And I'll tell you the story of what happened. So these are real products, and like as you see, Eliquis is from Johnson and Johnson, which is your product E. Xarelto is from Bayer, which is your product X, and Pradaxa is from Boehringer Ingelheim, which is your product P. And what happened, if you see at the time of start, they all were in the market roughly around the same time in 2014. And if you see in 2014, the sales of Eliquis was very low compared to Xarelto and Pradaxa. And in fact, Pradaxa was leading because Pradaxa put a lot of effort on highlighting efficacy, and they thought that what really mattered was efficacy. And all doctors would prescribe Pradaxa because of efficacy. But then what happened is, in that rush, doctors started to prescribe Pradaxa to many patients without doing a proper evaluation of safety. And what that led to was that many patients started to have bleeding. And for a doctor who has a patient who had a bleeding, becomes a big challenge to manage. And then automatically, the doctors prescribing stopped prescribing Pradaxa, and they looked at products where the safety parameters were better. And that was when Eliquis started to take off. And that was also when Eliquis did a relaunch actually globally. And they earlier had three messages, as you saw in the product profile. They talked about efficacy, they talked about safety, they talked about the dosage, but then they focused their messaging only on safety. And that helped the drug. You see the growth of Eliquis over the years. And this is only 2018. I mean, now it's probably a 10 billion over brand. So it's a hugely successful brand. And if you see, it's primarily because that they put disproportionate effort to establish the safety parameter. Whereas for Xarelto, they kind of stayed somewhere in between. So they talked about convenience, and they never and convenience is a benefit, but then only it can take you up to this level. Because I mean, at the end of the day, yes, it's nice to be convenient, but what really matters is the safety parameter for the prescribers and the patients, and that is where Eliquis really was able to take the cake. So that was a little bit of a very simple case study. It was not, I mean, there were a lot of things that happened in between. I'm not going into all those details. Tried to keep it very simple. Hope you liked it. And now I think I come to the end of my presentation. So this is my last slide. So here in conclusion, I think just have 3 points. First one is, if saving lives sounds exciting for you, then pharmaceutical industry is a great place to work. And that gets me to work every day morning. So it's really that positive feeling that I'm doing something which impacts the lives of patients some way or the other. And that's really very, very exciting for me. Otherwise, I think as an industry, it is a super regulated industry. There are lots of challenges, and you saw that there are so many stakeholders that you have to manage, pretty complex. And last but not the least, people generally feel that, oh yeah, you have an exclusivity for your products, so marketing and related commercialization would be super easy. But actually, it is not. As I think, as you have seen from some of the examples that I've presented today, that marketing and related commercialization plays such an immense role in the success of many brands. So with that, thank you again. Thank you for joining today's session, and great to have you all, and for all your participation. So now I open it up, I think, Dr. Chaudhary, for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arghya. Absolutely interesting. I think it's such a wide canvas, actually, a very wide global canvas. I think it's with a lot of insights. I think we have a lot of questions, but then I think what I will do is I'll just take one. I will just pose one question, because I'm sure it's quite late in the evening for you, and it's when, in fact, we're all extremely thankful, as well as sorry for keeping you waiting on Saturday evening.
No problem at all. My pleasure.
So my question is, I think there are, I would say, two questions. One is that in India, related to it's a really subsidized because it's still in the Supreme Court. Around last year, September 2022 also, you must have heard about this very famous case that is filed against Micro Labs about their Dolo 650 thing, where they supposed to have spent close to about 1,000 crores in quote unquote bribing the doctors and all that. That's what it is like. And the case was filed by one of the association itself. And like I said, as one of the investigative agencies, not the judicial, but then no, the quasi-judicial. I think they have cleared it, but again, still it's going on as we're talking. That's one thing where we get to see that somebody is trying to push their drug through wrong means, and things like that's one. The second and bigger issue is that where in India, I think I'm sure you would know it, where the OTC market is very, very strong, right? And therefore, that's one side, where I think the OTC, the people who are the other side of the druggist or chemist, whatever it is, and in most of the cases, we do not even know whether they are really, the authorized druggist and chemist kind of thing. That's what it is like. But I think the larger issue is that they've actually become the POM kind. That's the point of sale marketers. They prescribe. People go and say, "I have a headache. Can you let me know?" And whatever he prescribes, he becomes the he diagnoses right, and then he also prescribes. So he's all in all kind of thing. So therefore, now how do you control this kind of marketing? Because sometimes some things get wrong. And by the way, there are cases where, and I've seen at least 5, 6 such cases were reported where by giving, instead of giving one medicine, they got one, and therefore they couldn't quite age, and therefore all 6 of them passed away actually. So it can be quite fatal as well. So therefore, how do you control? So I think my 2 questions is, one is then in terms of how do you control, if at all there is a nefarious practice or trying to push your drug, that's one. If at all it came to your notice, that's one. The second one is where, like I said, in India, especially where your OTC is very, very strong, and they try to prescribe. Not that they have any position about any company, maybe because that is something they have been dealing with for a long time, and therefore they just want to prescribe out of their shared knowledge, or maybe their gut feeling, I know whatever it is. The point is that they just try to push it across the table, and therefore there are 2 instances. These are 2 instances that now we're looking at from the point of view of a larger pharma marketing. So what would be your idea to this, both of these, Arghya?
I think for me, maybe I'll try to address your first question. And that's why, if you remember, when I was covering the internal stakeholders, I mentioned about legal and compliance, and that is super important in the pharma industry, and especially compliance. Now, in India, I know, and also globally in all countries, they have very strict compliance regulations. And in India, like for example, there is OPPI, which is the organization for pharmaceutical manufacturers in India. Several multinational companies are part of that, and they also have their code of ethics and conduct, where they very clearly define how pharma marketing and promotion needs to happen, and clearly all kinds of unethical practices are absolutely not allowed. But having said that, India is such a big country, and there are so many local pharma companies that it is quite challenging, to control these malpractices. And in India, these things also happen more than probably other markets, because in India, it's totally out of pocket, and government is not controlling it. It's not a reimbursed market, because if it was a reimbursed market, then like for example, say Australia, which is a fully reimbursed market, or South Korea, which is a fully reimbursed market. Now, say for instance, a product like telmisartan, which is used for hypertension, now that has lost its exclusivity in these countries. So what government would do is that government would call all the manufacturers of telmisartan and ask them to quote a price for telmisartan, and check the quality of the telmisartan that is being provided by these manufacturers, and then award the tender or whatever to one of the manufacturers, and then that's the only telmisartan that is available for patients in South Korea. That's it. So then there is no chance for other companies trying to sell telmisartan to doctors in that country, because the challenge in India is that, suppose Dr. Chaudhary, you are in a clinical practice and you have a patient of hypertension and you want to prescribe telmisartan. There are 50 companies that have come to you to promote telmisartan. So in reality, there is no difference between the molecules. And then how the companies try to differentiate is by the quality of service that they provide to the doctor. And that is where, the challenge comes in. And that
Right.
is where then they try to, try to blur the line and try to do things which are ethically not allowed. And that is where, the challenge is in India, because unless, the government, d- uh, decides to move in the direction of maybe a universal health coverage or something like that, and really tries to also, or either ramp up, the monitoring system, which promotes these sort of local pharmaceutical companies, it would be very
Absolutely.
difficult to control this. And also the other challenge is, not only the bribing of doctors. I mean, even the bigger challenge I feel is the quality of medication that reaches the patient, because while, the better companies, whether it's Indian or multinational, they would still try to provide a good quality salt, like telmisartan, and they would put an effort to make sure that the bioavailability and the quality is really good. Whereas the local manufacturing companies, they would also probably make or cut some corners there and make some compromises, and to cover that, they would probably do something with the doctor. And then that becomes even more challenging for the patient, because imagine, a patient who has hypertension takes the medication but is not getting the benefit, which is even worse. So that becomes a bigger challenge, for in the Indian context. So that's with regards to your first question. I think with regards to the second question, again, it's the sheer size of India. I mean, you don't have so many doctors, you don't have that awareness. And also I think the general attitude that people have, that, I don't want to go to the doctor. Maybe I'll just go to the pharmacist, and then the pharmacist will tell me, what medication I need to have, and that is good enough. And that is where, it's causing so much problem, especially if you're looking at, antibiotic resistance. There are lots of, I mean, India is probably one of the few countries in the world where antibiotics can be just dispensed like that. You don't even need a prescription to dispense an antibiotic, which does not happen in most of the other countries. And that is what is causing us, antibiotic resistance. And it's a very difficult situation, because in India, for example, I know I heard that, I am not 100% sure, but I heard that in Delhi, for instance, there are some pathogens which are actually, you don't even have an antibiotic which could impact those pathogens. And in those situations, it becomes absolutely life threatening for those patients. And why that has happened is because of these antibiotic resistance and the lack of awareness of the public. So I think needs to have more awareness build up from the government as well as the industry, to make sure that these sort of advices are restricted.
Absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more with you on this. I think we have already crossed, 15 past us, 6 o'clock. But thank you so much from all of us, Argo. It is an absolute pleasure. And you joining us from Jakarta late in the evening, and from all of us, and from all of our participants, and from all of us at TimesPro, thank you so much for your time and sharing your amazing expertise, on this. I'm sure, like you rightly said, I'm sure each slide could have taken a long time, but I think you had to rush through because of, especially, when you asked about the constituents of, when you talked about external and internal, constituents. That's a huge list that you have put, and also for each one of them, I think one slide where you talked about the awareness part of it. I think that's what you're also mentioning in one sense. But thank you so much for from all of us, and look forward to hosting you for another interesting session very soon. Arghya, and thank you once again from all of us, including the participants. And thank you, participants, for all, as always, for your wonderful participation.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. It was absolutely nice working with you, Dr. Chaudhary, and also your team. And also thanks to all the participants. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thanks, Sam. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thanks.
Yeah.